Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Another entry here based on some of your long ago suggested entries. This one also came about 2 years or so ago, and it has to do with a cryptid or a variation of a cryptid that I've mentioned in the past. Several of my entries have been talking about these so-called living trees, trees that have some kind of characteristic to them that either adapt to, let's say, the environment around them in a very purposeful manner, in some cases having either faces or having some kind of other, I guess, defensive attack. This one is almost close to it, except for the idea that it doesn't necessarily have like any living attributes to it per se, like an actual face or some other noise or something along those lines. But no, it adapts to the environment by ensuring that it can, I guess, in some ways trap and feed itself from some of the, I guess, people or some of the other animal wildlife that happens to walk by it or come close to it. So I love finding and talking about these particular cryptids because the idea that there's a living tree that could be so dangerous that it actually targets humans, not necessarily specifically targeting humans, but it is included within its let's say delicacy. It has to do with a tree, and this is a weird name, so I'm hoping I'm saying it right. It's called the Umdhlebi, which is found somewhere in a place called Zululand in South Africa. So quite fascinating stuff. The only known entries, though, associated with this living tree, this Umdhlebi, has to do with something around the 1800s, late 1800s or so. No other entries or recorded history thus far, but two instances of people describing its existence add more credence to it. So what is this unique cryptid, this Umdhlebi, this let's say this living tree of some sort? Well, it's a plant species of sorts again that originated somewhere in Zululand, South Africa. The very first known example, I guess you could say, of it being reported happened to be in a journal called Nature by a reverend of all things, a Reverend G.W. Parker. It seemed like he was there in South Africa as part of some kind of missionary status, like he was there, I guess, to spread the word when it came to his religion. And in doing so, that's when he came across this particular species of tree, of a living tree. Now, what makes it different from other trees is the fact that it actively ensures that it can create something to help trap its prey. Not in the sense of, like, let's say a Venus flytrap, which are infamous, probably the most famous example of all when it comes to trapping prey. No, trapping prey. No, in this case, this thing, whatever it is, whatever species of tree it is, it essentially creates some kind of poison. How this poison comes about is still not really known per se, but it seems like there's this poison that it fertilizes the soil around it with. And on top of that, it purposely grounds itself within, let's say, really rocky terrains, so that way it is the only tree, quote unquote tree, within that area. That has to be a conscious choice because its whole existence is based on the fact that once something, either a person or another living animal, comes close in contact with it, this poison that happens to be around it infects that person or infects those animals, and then those people die out. And when they die right near that tree, and that's how it feeds itself, because afterward, when that person or the animals begin the process of decay, it helps fertilize the soil around it, and that's how it continues its existence. So again, I think that's a very conscious choice, like a living animal of some sort, for it to ensure that it is found just in pretty much only rocky, barren terrain, so that way it's the only tree around. That way, whenever an animal, let's say, is coming around it, it sees it as the only thing to really truly eat around. Like, let's say there's an animal that only eats leaves or some kind of other plant life, and it sees this thing. It has no choice in all of the rocky terrain surrounding it from one let's say, end of the environment to the other. It comes across it, then it eats whatever it eats there. It gets poisoned by it, and then it dies, and then that's it. Then that thing decays, and then it becomes food for the tree itself. So very, very fascinating stuff. The other instance that it was reported was a guy by the name of Henry Callaway in some book called The Religious System of the Amazulu. This one was published in 1870, and there it records several stories related to the tree. Nothing really distinctive as far as the tree and how it looks like, but for one thing, it seems like the layers of the tree itself, one layer, the outside layer, seems to be your traditional bark. Like it's the bark that's grayish, almost blackish, as much as you would think as your average bark is, because it's dead. It's a dead outer layer, but the underneath portion of it, that seems to be distinct. It seems to have some kind of reddish, blackish hue underneath it. So it's a living layer of some sort. How this thing is considered living, I don't know. Don't know if it necessarily, let's say, glows periodically, or if you see some things moving underneath the bark, but that seems to be the most distinct feature of it. So if you ever come across something that looks like that, where it's a reddish, let's say it's your average tree, it has your standard bark on the outside, but underneath it you seem to see a different layer underneath, a living layer that seems to produce, let's say, some reddish blackish hue of some sort, then that's where this thing is as well. Also, the fruit that some people have cited that seems to grow from this also has a reddish and blackish hue as well. That may be actually the fruit itself that is also poisonous, who knows. And then on top of that, there's another way to easily distinct it from others, and that is the idea that there should be skeletons lying around this tree because of the victims tied to it. Also, there's the idea where if it has some kind of, I guess, closest defense, if you would, if something ever damages it, like let's say one of its limbs is cut off or part of its bark is forcibly removed, a large chunk of it, it's supposed to release some kind of dangerous fluid, some kind of, I guess you could call it poisonous fluid as well, which is another form of its attack. So some of the symptoms, in fact, that people reported back then as far as it being poisoned by this tree has to do with the fact of having severe headaches, bloodshot eyes, just overall pain, especially in the abdominal area. And then some of the more severe items were constant diarrhea, very, very strong fever, and then finally delirium, and then death. So of course that's the worst of it all when it comes to being poisoned by this tree. There's even the idea that maybe, just maybe, and again this it's hard to chronicle because there's no other known instances or evidence or physical evidence of this thing at all, but there's also the idea that it may have even secreted some kind of poisonous gas as another way to ensure that it could capture its victims, which would be the worst of all scenarios because you wouldn't necessarily have to even be close to this thing. And maybe again, if this was truly a living item and it sensed or noticed that something else was coming nearby, some other living item, again a human or an animal, then it could direct that poisonous gas straight to that entity or that person, and then that was it. That's when they would be infected, and that's when there would be deaths occurring left and right. So in fact, it was so prominent back then in the 1800s that the local Zulus would actually sacrifice sheep, if you can believe it, sheep and goats straight to the tree. My guess is that they would take these living creatures, these sheep and goats, and then just kill them right there by the tree if they let's say thought that one of those trees happened to be this Umdhlebi, and when that happened they would probably place it right by the tree as a form of a sacrifice, and then just through natural decay itself then the sheep and the goats would disappear. But at least to the local Zulus, it would seem like the tree was taking this offering and then consuming it to them. But that's how much ingrained the idea was that yes, this is something that has some kind of living status, so much so that to the local Zulus as well, that to them it encased some kind of evil spirit in some cases, and they wanted to make sure that this was a way to calm this evil spirit down. So quite fascinating stuff. No, the notion that there is again another version of a living tree out there, one that targets victims, one that is able to create some kind of defensive stance to them, one that may even contain, at least according to the local Zulus, some kind of evil spirits. I still love the idea that this thing purposely inhabits these rocky terrains, ensuring that it remains the only place for people or animals to come by visit. People in some cases try to maybe find food or maybe find shelter, or animals also try to find food, and then that's how it traps and that's how it ensures it creates and captures its prey. So all very fascinating information. If anyone has any more info that could be tied to this unique cryptid, that'd be great to hear. Nothing really afterward, unfortunately. Wherever this tree was there in South Africa in Zululand, if it's still there, then it has remained well hidden, because there's no known instance going into 1900s or the 2000s of anybody encountering this creature, or even more specifically having any kind of, let's say, proof about its existence. But again, the idea that two known, I guess articles of some sort, one the religious system of the Amazulu and the other one a journal called Nature, chronicled its existence, that makes you wonder that yes, there really truly was a chance that this thing existed. So all fascinating stuff. So alright everybody, thanks again as always, take care.